shoring up the base.
Hopefully something positive can happen. We will see.
The president announces the largest set of sanctions against North Korea at a meeting with conservatives. Florida shooting. New details emerge about an officer who failed to take action. Back at work. After a week-long retreat, the Holy Father resumes his busy schedule. And a look at St. Francis. The founder of the Franciscans is the center of a new exhibit in the nation's capital. We'll take you there. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, February 23rd, 2018.
It is my historic privilege to give you the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
President Trump takes the stage and passionately argues gun-free schools are actually putting children at risk. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. At the annual Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington, the president told the pro-gun rights crowd if a teacher can handle a gun, they should be armed. White House correspondent Mark Irons has more. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The president continues to push this idea in the wake of the Florida school shooting. New reports are coming out that an armed deputy at the site of the school did not act to stop the shooter. The president believes a gun-toting teacher would have saved students' lives.
And a teacher would have shot the hell out of him before he knew what happened.
The president says schools are an easy target for attackers, and armed teachers with concealed weapons could be more effective than armed security guards.
I don't want to have 100 guards standing with rifles all over the school.
The president pumped up the conservative crowd, defending the right to bear arms. He did not share his idea to increase the age limit to buy certain types of rifles. It's a proposal the NRA is opposed to.
You don't mind if I go off script a little bit, because, it's sort of boring. It's a little boring.
A freewheeling Trump spoke for over an hour, making big claims.
My administration, I think, has had the most successful first year in the history of the presidency.
He shared wins for his conservative base, like funding the military and cutting red tape.
No president has ever cut so many regulations in their entire term.
Trump said it's not Republicans holding up an immigration deal that would allow undocumented immigrants to become citizens.
Democrats have totally abandoned DACA. They don't even talk to me about it.
In October, Trump canceled DACA. Now Congress has the power to help young immigrants known as Dreamers. But the president will only sign a bill that includes his demands.
Don't worry, you're getting the wall, don't worry.
He had a faith-based reminder for the crowd.
We don't worship government, we worship God.
And a warning for foreign countries like Iran.
People that treat us badly, we treat them much worse than they can ever imagine. That's the way it has to be. That's the way it has to be.
He also announced big sanctions on a rogue regime.
North Korea, we imposed today the heaviest sanctions ever imposed on a country before.
At a White House briefing, President Trump's Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said the U.S. has now imposed over 450 sanctions on North Korea. We asked if this will cause the country to have a change of heart. He told us sanctions work. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. It hasn't always been a smooth ride for conservatives and Donald Trump, but how do they feel now? Correspondent Jason Calvi takes the pulse of the conservative base gathering outside Washington.
Conservatives stand up for the president.
It's agenda setting. He was really expressing the things that he wants pushed, especially with, the gun, the Second Amendment stuff that we've seen because of the shootings in Florida.
Many college students pack in for the Conservative Political Action Conference. This Ivy League student tells me he's motivated to bring the conservative message back to campus.
There's a bad stereotype of what maybe we represent, but I think that if we can show that we're very smart, reasoned people, we can change that stigma.
Another says he's inspired by the students and the president.
Loved what he said today. Today was awesome. Wonderful speech today. The first year has been great. It would be nice if they'd have gotten rid of Obamacare. That would have been really nice.
CPAC is bigger than what happens in the big ballroom. It's a gathering of conservatives from around the country. It's also a chance for conservatives to learn about conservative organizations and pick up some reading, all with the mission of keeping the momentum going into the 2018 election.
I think he's having a fantastic year. I think the key thing is the Democrats right now are a little bit worried on how they're going to stop him.
And they'll have to deal with these fired up conservatives. At CPAC, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Jason. President Trump also spoke about a broader problem in the United States, the lack of respect for life.
We also need to create a culture in our country that cherishes life and human dignity. That's part of what we're talking about. A culture that condemns violence and never glorifies violence.
A panel at the conference yesterday focused on defunding Planned Parenthood. Catherine Glenn Foster, who was on that panel, joins us now from CPAC. She is the president and CEO of Americans United for Life. Catherine, welcome back to the program. Do you think President Trump should have mentioned something more specific about the pro-life issue in his speech today?
You know, this morning, President Trump strongly affirmed the need for the respect for the dignity of every single human life. And just yesterday morning, Vice President Pence, who also spoke here, just reminded the entire crowd about the measures that President Trump has taken to really further the life-affirming mission that this administration has stood behind. He reminded the crowd about the Mexico City policy, how President Trump reinstated and expanded the Mexico City policy, which prevents U.S. taxpayer funding from being used to fund foreign and international organizations either performing or promoting abortion overseas. He also reminded us about the steps that the administration has taken towards defunding and allowing states to defund. And the really pivotal piece of this, and particularly with this crowd that was so encouraged and enthusiastic, cheering loudly at those words, are that these people who have come from across the nation, the CPAC attendees, they are able to go back to their home states where the reduced gridlock at the state level means that we have the opportunity for great progress going state by state to defund Planned Parenthood.
Well, you note all the commitments that President Trump and Vice President Pence has made to the pro-life movement. Some have in the past doubted his sincerity on the issue. How committed do you think he is in terms of engaging with pro-life groups and talking about the life issue with you guys?
I would say that he is extremely committed. We have seen that firsthand with his engagement with the March for Life, with the one-on-one meetings that he and his administration have even instigated, have reached out for with pro-life leaders, with many of the stances that the administration has taken. They are doing what they can to fulfill the campaign promises that President Trump made. And between the RNC platform and President Trump and his personal commitment to life that he has repeatedly espoused, I am very pleased with the progress that he has made in this first year.
Okay, well, let's talk about what's going on outside Washington, D.C., because you mentioned some of the momentum there. What are conservatives doing on the local and the state level to protect the unborn?
Well, at the local and state level, you don't have that same political gridlock that you have in D.C. You don't see the same holdups with the Senate where, for example, one bill that we should all be able to agree on, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which would prevent most abortions after 5 months when science has shown that babies can feel pain, when that can't even advance to the full Senate vote. That's a problem, even when a majority of senators want that vote. So at the state and local levels, we see the possibility for great impact. More than 20 states, 24 states have already defunded in some way, with at least some funds, the abortion industry. They've said that public funding, U.S. taxpayer funding, cannot be used to perform or refer for abortions. And that's a huge step in the right direction. There are a lot of different vehicles and methods that can be accomplished with. One of those methods is AUL's own Defunding the Abortion Industry and Advancing Women's Health Act, which creates a tiering system by which organizations, healthcare facilities that do provide comprehensive women's health care are placed at a high tier where they are in line for health care funding from the government, and organizations that do not provide comprehensive health care, as Planned Parenthood, for example, does not provide comprehensive women's health care, they are either at the lowest tier or are prevented from receiving taxpayer funding. So that's one of the ways that we've seen that can happen. And just taking a step back, we see that states really are in the best position to be able to determine at the ground level where the taxpayer dollars they receive and they manage and monitor, where those taxpayer dollars should be going. When you look at states like Iowa, for example, and the stats are replicated on the national level, we see this time and time again. We see that when it comes to Planned Parenthood, the total services are down, the total patients are down, the cancer screening and prevention services are down. What's up? Abortion numbers and government funding. That's one of the many reasons why it's time to defund Planned Parenthood.
Catherine Glenn Foster, President and CEO of Americans United for Life, talking to us from CPAC. Thanks so much for talking with us, Catherine.
Thanks for having me.
New details emerge on last week's shooting at a Florida high school, prompting a lawmaker to call it, quote, an abject breakdown at all levels. We're learning that an armed officer on campus did not attempt to stop the gunman. Instead, reports indicate he stayed outside while the shooter opened fire inside. The deputy has since resigned. In addition, a delay in the security camera footage meant local police thought the shooter was still inside the school when he actually had fled the scene 20 minutes earlier. A former senior advisor to President Trump's campaign pleads guilty in a federal courthouse. Rick Gates agrees to plead guilty to 2 counts, including conspiracy against the U.S. The U.S. State Department says the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem will open in May. The opening coincides with Israel's 70th anniversary. The president announced last year he'd move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. More than 100 schoolgirls are missing after terrorists attack a town in northern Nigeria. Parents are fearing the worst following the Boko Haram assault on Monday. Many Nigerians still remember when the Islamic extremists captured more than 250 girls in the town of Chibok in 2014. Around 100 of those schoolgirls still remain in captivity. Satellite images show Myanmar's government is using bulldozers to level villages where Rohingya Muslims lived. The photos reveal more than 24 demolished towns. Human rights activists fear the government is destroying evidence of ethnic cleansing. A new challenger emerges in the presidential election in Venezuela, a television evangelist. With 2 months before the election, Reverend Javier Bertucci is the only challenger to President Nicolas Maduro. Bertucci calls himself, quote, the candidate of hope. The country is struggling from widespread food shortages and high inflation. Diocese in southern Mexico removes its nuns following the murder earlier this month of 2 Catholic priests. The parents of one of the sisters were also killed. The diocese in Chilapa already has shut down its school after several months after threats from drug gangs. A bill that would legalize divorce in the Philippines is stirring up the Catholic country, according to local media. The committee in the House of Representatives has reportedly approved the measure. Church leaders are calling the proposal anti-family. The Philippines is one of the only countries that still outlaws divorce. A Vatican sex abuse expert is in good condition after undergoing gallbladder surgery in Chile. Archbishop Charles Scicluna must wait 2 to 3 days before resuming activities. He is in Chile to investigate complaints that a bishop appointed by Pope Francis covered up abuse allegations by another priest. The case sparked outrage during the Pope's visit to South American country earlier this year. Pope Francis is back in the Vatican after a week-long spiritual retreat outside Rome.
Per il Sud Sudan, il Congo e anche la Siria.
The Holy Father asking the faithful to pray and fast today for the African nations of South Sudan and Congo. He added Syria due to ongoing violence there and invited people of all faiths to join in. Alan Holdren is EWTN's Rome Bureau Chief. So Alan, the Pope is back. The Church recommends we go on retreat once in a while, and the Pope, of course, is no exception. What is a papal retreat like?
Well, Wyatt, he went to a nice secluded place outside of Rome, up in the hills, surrounded by a forest, nice and silent. He was surrounded by about 50 or so of his closest colleagues here in the Vatican, members of the Roman Curia, and they divided up their days, 6 days basically, between meditations, Mass, meals, and prayer. It was a time just to spend away from Rome. The priest that led the spiritual exercises focused on thirst for Christ, thirst in the Gospels. And today when the Pope thanked him for having led the meditations, he thanked him for opening them up fearlessly to the Holy Spirit and to jar them out of what he said, a mummification from being enclosed in their work.
Sounds like an incredible experience and a great message too. So now that the Holy Father's back at the Vatican, what's on his schedule in the coming days?
So tomorrow morning, Wyatt, he's going to be spending a little bit of time after his morning Mass with victims of Christian persecution in Nigeria and also Pakistan. These are people who are going to be in town with an Aid to the Church in Need initiative that's taking place, and Pope Francis wanted to meet with them personally to hear their experiences. He's also going to be going to a Roman parish in the area of Ponte Mamolo, here within the city. It's the parish of Pope St. Gelasius. And he's going to be meeting with young students receiving catechism, also with the elderly, the poor, and also just with the community to celebrate Mass with them.
The Pope has always been good at engaging the people. Tomorrow, Rome's famous Colosseum was actually turning red. Alan, tell us a little bit about why and what's happening there.
That's right. Those folks who are going to be meeting with the Pope will actually be there, and it's because this Aid to the Church in Need group wants to raise awareness worldwide to the ongoing difficulties of so many Christians in the world, and to do so they're using the monument to martyrdom that is the Colosseum, lighting it up in the red color of the blood of the martyrs. Simultaneously in Aleppo, Syria, and also in Mosul, Iraq, they're going to be lighting up churches. It's really an important event just for people to know that this still exists as a problem, that people still die for being persecuted for their faith, in particular Christians worldwide.
Such an important message, and like I say, so important that around the world we highlight the plight of Christians. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And you can watch the Colosseum turn red tomorrow right here on EWTN. Hope for the Persecuted Church airs at noon Eastern. You can watch it again Saturday night at 9:45. Coming up, the President and gun control. We're back at CPAC to discuss solutions after the Florida shooting. And wrapping up the Winter Games, the U.S. delegation arrives in South Korea, plus an update on the medal count. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. A Catholic organization known for helping the world's poor is drawing heavy criticism from within its own ranks. It stems from a $25 million grant the U.S.-based Papal Foundation approved for an Italian hospital with a history of corruption. LifeSite News first reported details of that grant. You can get all of the details from our news partners at National Catholic Register. Just visit ncregister.com. The Republican Governors Association says Missouri Governor Eric Greitens is stepping down from their executive committee. This after he was indicted for invasion of privacy stemming from an affair. The pro-life Republican admits to having an affair but denies committing a crime. There are calls for him to step down as governor, including from some in his own party. But the executive director of Missouri's GOP says the case is a political hit job. In the wake of last week's school shooting in Florida, gun control is a major topic of discussion at the Conservative Political Action Conference. President Trump today talked about gun control, one of many speeches to touch on the topic. Yesterday, Lauren Ashburn spoke to someone who says stopping school shootings is about more than just laws on firearms.
Joining us now is Lawrence Jones, a political commentator and the new editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been all over this gun control issue, and it's definitely one of the main topics at CPAC. President Trump announced today he wants to move to ban bump stocks like the ones used in the Las Vegas massacre. The vice president said no teachers should be in danger in an American school as he addressed CPAC. The NRA president says that gun control advocates are exploiting the tragedy. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
They want to sweep right under the carpet the failure of school security, the failure of family, the failure of America's mental health system, and even the unbelievable failure of the FBI.
You, I think, agree with him. You caution that we cannot get duped by our emotions. So are you saying that the president is wrong to make a gun policy move?
Look, I believe that the president has explored some different policy positions, such as the bump stocks, that I think, okay, that's reasonable. But I would caution all Americans when we get into this debate about guns or the shooting itself, that we don't so much focus on the tools that these mass murderers are using, but we focus on the person and their mind and what drives them to do something like this. And we also should focus on all the signs that were there that we missed before they committed these acts. If you take a tool away, then the killer finds a different tool. When you take the tool away, you're not really dealing with the problem. You're just incentivizing these mass killers to find something else to carry out these acts.
So I think that it's important to talk about the media's role in all of this. You were on a panel, I think, talking about the media, and you said instead of complaining about the fake news, you can take the media into your own hands as a citizen journalist. And you said that technology has changed in America. Your phone is your greatest weapon. Well, President Trump figured that out. He won an election. You cover college students. Don't they do this already?
Yeah, so Campus Reform has over 90 correspondents across the country at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, and we train them. We give them media training of how to do an interview, how to write articles, and we report on stories that the mainstream media typically refuses to cover: free speech issues, indoctrination, bias on these campuses, silences of free speech.
What about gun control, Lawrence? What are you going to say to them about getting the message out on gun control?
Well, what I always tell my reporters is that we follow the story, and right now there is a debate on college campuses. There are a lot of college campuses that want gun controls, and there's a lot of students that also want campus carry. The university that I attended, the University of North Texas, has campus carry. I talked to Chris Lash, and he is the husband of Dana Lash, who was she's a spokesperson for the NRA, and he told me that during what we did not see during that CNN town hall, where there was a lot of young people that didn't get to ask their question about guns, and they were actually in support of the Second Amendment. And that's the media bias that I'm talking about. We have to have an authentic conversation. And if there are young people that support the Second Amendment that don't believe that we should be banning AR-15s, then they have a right to have that viewpoint, and that should be discussed. And so I advocate for my reporters and correspondents to go after the story, to tell both sides of the story, to get comment. The basic journalism 101.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Lawrence Jones, thank you so much for being with us, Editor-in-Chief of Campus Reform.
Thanks, my friend.
Up next, a miraculous discovery in a church destroyed by an earthquake 1 year ago in Italy. And a popular saint is featured at one of the nation's premier museums. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Ivanka Trump arrives in South Korea for the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics. The first daughter, who is also a White House advisor, meets with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. She's pushing him to put more pressure on North Korea to end its nuclear program. But South Korean officials want to use a softer approach, one that highlights their neighbor's appearance in the Olympics. And in the medal count, the U.S. remains in fourth place in terms of total medals. Norway has 37, Germany 26, Canada 27, and the United States with 21, and finally 18 for the Netherlands. An Italian priest is thanking God after he helped make what some are calling a miraculous discovery. 40 consecrated communion hosts were found perfectly preserved inside a church that was destroyed in an earthquake in 2016. An Italian Catholic newspaper reports the communion have no bacteria and no mold. Officials say it resembles a miracle in Siena, Italy in 1730. A local bishop simply says the discovery, quote, is a sign of hope for everyone. St. Francis of Assisi is at the center of a new exhibit at the National Gallery of Art. Heavenly Earth showcase works from the Renaissance through the 18th century. They depict the saint receiving the stigmata, or the wounds of Christ. Curator Ginger Hammer found the inspiration in these rare 17th century Baroque volumes.
I really love the miniature leaf by Cosmetura, which is especially gorgeous. And you'll see that in the first room. In that particular image, you see him kneeling in water, similar to a baptism of Christ image, which is very unusual for an image of Francis.
The exhibit is more than 3 years in the making. It will be on display through July 8th. And that wraps up our show for tonight and for this week. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.